restart it. Okay. So, first thing we want to just jump into, I hope everyone's doing well. So, we published a blog last Friday about our latest release, Beta.4. I highly encourage you guys to check this out. I'll paste it in the chat here. But this is basically a roadmap of where we're going. Exactly, who needs backups, right? So this is a roadmap where we're going, an explanation of some terminology, difference between Windows PowerShell, PowerShell Core, what we're trying to do around .NET Standard, how we're trying to be compatible with existing modules, and the fact that we don't plan yet or currently on making any major feature updates or lower priority bug fixes to Windows PowerShell, or the traditional version of PowerShell that's shipped against .NET Framework in Windows. So I haven't seen any major concerns about this. In fact, I've actually seen the opposite, which is that people seem to be trying a lot of their old scripts and commandlets and are surprised that they seem to work just fine. The point of this blog was really primarily as a call to action for everyone to do exactly that and let us know about what your experience has been like. So we've got a sort of meta issue that we're tracking here where people are piling in with information about various modules that do and do not work. Obviously, we are at Microsoft. Some of these teams are more amenable than others to doing test passes of their commandlets against 6.0, but really you guys are the ones using these things on a day-to-day basis and are really the quickest canary that we have to finding out about which modules seem to be working great and which teams that we need to go talk to get them to port over whatever doesn't work. So we're really looking to you guys to help us drive the prioritization here on which modules we should be tackling, which partners we should be talking to, and ultimately where we should be investing in PowerShell to make sure that this move from the full CLR to the core CLR doesn't impact you guys too heavily. So for instance, I've been seeing a ton of conversation in various channels around the Office 365 commandlets, the connect MSOL service commandlet specifically that lets you get up to one of those endpoints. So we're talking to some folks on our side to find out what we can do to sort of alleviate some of that pain. But yeah, the TLDR of it is please download Beta 4. It's out. It works with CDXML. It works with a whole host of Windows PowerShell modules right off the bat. I've got it right here. We throw this warning right at the beginning to say we're appending the Windows PowerShell PS module path, which means that we're including System32. It's not a sure thing that we're going to do that forever. We don't know if that's the right decision to make or if that should be an opt-in option that people make. But for now, we want people to be trying these scripts and finding out what does and doesn't work. So it doesn't seem to have had a performance impact yet. I'm not necessarily sure what the downside would be here other than module collisions.
I mean, the downside is there are some inbox modules that we know don't work and won't work as they exist, like Active Directory, for example. I don't believe Joey is sharing his desktop right now.
Oh, no.
There's a bunch of questions about that.
That was your job. You're supposed to be monitoring the chat, right?
I am monitoring the chat. That's why I brought it up.
So,
but
yeah.
in any case, so what Joey's talking about for the adding the Windows PowerShell module path, right now it is a temporary solution. And then based on the data, like let's say hypothetically, if we have 80% compatibility, then maybe one option is that we keep it, but we also have like a blacklist of modules that we know aren't compatible, so it doesn't cause confusion if you try to use those. Like that's one of the things we've talked about internally. But again, we're going to wait till we get more data before we decide what we actually do about Windows PowerShell module path.
I had a quick comment.
Yeah, totally.
Actually, totally independently, today I was going to bring up, is there a way to have either PS Analyzer or something similar be able to assess code and call out PowerShell core compatibility, but also go a little bit deeper since there's been a lot of use of .NET throughout
Yep.
code to be able to do the .NET part too. So I ran into a problem where I was making some adjustments to the OpenSSH code, and I called the environment variable method within .NET with 2 parameters in order to specify the machine context, and it chokes on Nano. So it'd be really helpful not to just have the commandlets, but also any .NET code we call being called out if it's incompatible.
Yeah, so we've been talking about doing exactly this. There's actually somebody doing very preliminary investigation into how this is possible. It becomes a very complex problem because you have the types available in the underlying CLR, the types that are available to a C# application or a C# application or commandlets using system.management.automation or some types that are available in PowerShell. You've got PowerShell commandlets that are available in various versions of Windows. You've got add type references that are going to depend on the different versions or editions of the CLR. And so we're trying to come up with a way where you could essentially specify, hey, I want my module or my script to target, this version of the CLR or this set of versions of the CLR and this set of versions of PowerShell and this set of platforms, right? We've also got the problem that some commandlets work great on Windows and aren't yet available on Linux. And so, yeah, we're looking at figuring out how to do that right. And I think David Wilson's getting involved as well to sort of figure out how Plaster might integrate there. The script analyzer guys we're talking to about that. So it's a complicated problem. I think the more difficult thing is gathering the data and keeping it in sync. Not necessarily, doing the validation is easy. Once you have these data files full of what's available where, but yeah, that's absolutely something we want to do as our next milestone. What I'm really trying to target thematically for beta 5 and beta 6 is to try and start solving the developer story. So really, we've had this pull request open for a very long time around what we're calling PowerShell standard, and I've shown this to you guys a couple times before. Unfortunately, we kind of stalled out on progress here for a little bit. But this is like this 11,000 line PR that is defining an API surface area for C# applications to target a common set of APIs that exist between PowerShell 3 and 6. And so we want to do something similar with those script analyzer rules we're talking about to target a certain set of commandlets. And assemblies that work and don't work, or required assemblies too in the PSD1. So it's just it's a multifaceted problem. So yes, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, let me just add, because Keith actually opened this issue on script analyzer repo, issue number 127. I think there's a great discussion we talked about. I don't think we've made progress yet, partly because we haven't shipped or getting close to ship yet. But I think if you just add more feedback to that one, that'd be great. I don't think it captures the Linux versus Windows versus Mac problem. And maybe that could be a separate issue in the script analyzer repo.
I also have a possible implementation suggestion that might also help with getting through the static analysis quicker, and that would be like some sort of active analysis. I don't know if you guys remember back in the day, but the app compat toolkit had a capability to run an application, and when a API call failed, it would catch it, and then it would go in and make some adaptations and try again to try to isolate whether something was in that case a non-admin permissions error or not. But if there would be some way to put on like a switch that basically says actually run the code in order to determine if I'm compatible, and of course you'd have to be on the exact clear and the exact version of PowerShell that you actually want to check out. But it would be cool if it could actually run each command and kind of meta catch it if it had a problem and be able to document it for you by going through the whole code base rather than having to go, oh, problem 1, fix it, add it to the metadata, it's incompatible, problem 2, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, it's I'm not familiar with that at all. I would love a pointer to that because we do have somebody. It's I don't know how active she's been yet in GitHub, but we've a relatively new member of the team, Maria, who's been just poking around at the implementation on this, trying to see where we get the biggest bang for our buck. But yeah, I would love a pointer to that. That was Darwin on the phone, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks, Darwin. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Um, cool. So I'll say ping Darwin for a pointer. Um, so I want to make sure that you guys can talk about whatever you'd like to talk about before we jump into some more stuff here. Does anyone have any?
Well, Keith has brought up an issue. I know there's an active issue discussion on this, which is the dev story on beta 5. He wants to have it resolved by beta 5, beta 6.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just said I'm trying to
Okay.
not resolved by. He just means regarding because I just said we want to tackle the dev story in
Yes.
5 and 6.
Yes.
So that's, he's just saying yes, do that.
I thought you were actually using. So there's a yeah. So .NET Core App 2.0 is actually literally what we use.
So it's there's a clarification and along with that dev story coming in beta 5.6, I'm going to have a blog post that really goes into more detail about the uh, dev specific. Somebody's got a keyboard going there that might. No worries. Um, but yeah, we are targeting Net Core App 2.0 with this, and specifically that's because we need some types that are allowing us to do add type and like dynamic compilation, I believe.
Yep.
And but Net Core, the runtime that we are using is a Net Standard 2.0 compatible. Oh, somebody's ringing. So as a net standard compatible runtime, we can load things into it that target net standard 2.0, even if we're not net standard 2.0. So technically, we can add assemblies targeting net standard 2.0 or assemblies targeting net core app 2.0, or even assemblies targeting net framework where the API set falls into what's available in Net Standard 2.0, and that's why these Windows PowerShell modules are able to work because, um, Net 451 or 452 assemblies into Net Core 2.0.
Hey, Joey.
Yep, go ahead.
This is Keith here. Ask a quick question on that. So if I'm running PowerShell Core on Windows, does that mean you guys are actually running against the full framework, thereby I have access to more capability as opposed to running on Linux or Mac OS, or is it still, tied to .NET Core on Windows?
It's still tied to .NET Core. Yeah, the only compatibility interface, so to speak, that we provide for full framework binaries is via Net Standard. And the
Gotcha.
goal there is there's a lot of a lot of optimizations. I've got Steven and Bruce probably speak better to this, but there's some optimizations that happen in Windows around the fact that Net Framework is expected to be a singleton and everything gets loaded into memory ahead of time, and you've got the GAC and it's doing dependency management of your assemblies, and so moving to Net Core is what allows us to do side by side and portable installs that don't require a reboot and so on and so forth. So there's potentially like what we've got could be built as a full CLR application and hosted in the full CLR, but it's not something that we're looking into right now because we lose all those benefits that we gain with Net Core.
So that's why we saw the activity recently with removing some of the performance counter commandlets.
That's actually
That's a different.
Yeah. Oh,
just an issue around some use of unsupported APIs. So we're looking at trying to figure out how to do those in a supported way. But yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Those are native APIs. Those are nothing to do with .NET really.
Yeah. So those just happen to land at the same time, but you will probably see. I mean, based off of the success we've seen in the compatibility so far, you will probably see a lot of full CLR specific code that's existed in the code base start to get pulled out to make the source management easy, it easier to build new features and so on and so forth. So going back up, that answer your question, Keith?
Pretty much. I guess it sort of precludes then the possibility of writing PowerShell modules that are targeted specifically for Windows that take advantage of full framework features that aren't available in .NET Core and be able to host that inside of PS Core.
Yes, that
Okay.
is what that means.
Okay.
Yeah, we're hoping that the surface area of net standard is adequate for the kinds of scenarios that you're looking to do greenfield, but if and where they are not, we definitely want to hear about it.
And I think if there's specific capability in .NET that you need in Core, you should probably just open up issues in Core Effects repo.
Okay.
Don't look for WinForms anytime soon.
Yeah, I was just thinking of, sort of specific things like Windows for things like performance counters, ETW, that sort of stuff.
Right. Totally. We may need to figure out a way to expose some of that stuff without .NET, because I think .NET's goal is not to do a lot of that Windows-specific stuff in the future. But the Windows team we'll talk to them and find out what their plan is to manage those things in a nice way going forward in a post-net framework world.
And sorry, I haven't actually tried this, but does that mean we also don't get the SIM capabilities on Windows and PS Core?
No, those work great.
Okay.
Yeah, so everything, and actually, this is Windows PowerShell, but this is actually beta 4. My title is lying, but like what I just ran here, get net adapter, like that's a CDXML commandlet. There's CDXML. Like these work just great. So actually, like a ton of these modules in here, get volume, I think, and disk, like all the storage commandlets.
All those are WMI based.
They're all,
which also means those will never exist on Linux as is.
Right. We would have to do some serious rethinking for those to work on Linux.
Gotcha. So that is something that then is not using .NET Core Effects, or is?
It's using our CDXML.
It's using our layer, yeah. So
Gotcha. Okay.
.NET Core to talk to SIM and WMI.
Gotcha. All right. Cool. Thanks.
So those commandlets are actually WMI v2 providers.
Which is that's get SIM instance as opposed to get WMI object.
Yep. The WMI commands don't exist in Core world for legacy.
But a ton of these, when I go into storage, what I can't type. These are all CDXML, right? So these work great. We regressed those in beta 2 and beta 3, which is why you might have been worried that they weren't going to work, but that's actually a huge reason why.
That was due to a bug in Core Effects, by the way.
Yeah.
not in our code.
Okay. So I think that mostly answers that question. If you got any follow-up, Keith, you can post in the chat here. I'm going to go to Trevor's here on the dependency management. This is something that, like, one of the big onions I want to start peeling with the next couple milestones. So I tried to do this myself a little bit. Like having NuGet dependencies is like I hadn't done it in a really long time in a sort of GitHub world, and it's kind of a bummer. Like the only really like decent way I think to do it without having your CI pull all the NuGet packages down and build everything at package time is to like check DLLs into GitHub. Like if you're just doing basic development, and like that's no good. So we probably need some kind of tooling story at some point. I don't know how robust it's going to be in time for 6.0, but we should at least have a story for, hey, here's how you build a C# application and do your dependency management in a semi-sane way. So I definitely want to provide that sort of best practice guidance, even if we don't have awesome tooling on day one. And I assume, Trevor, I don't see your response here, but I assume you're talking about DLL dependency management, both native and managed.
Yeah, so basically managing dependencies for like other PowerShell modules that may be dependencies, and in addition, NuGet packages. There's DLLs, as you pointed out already. I mean, checking DLLs in is pretty much the way to handle things right now, and for obvious reasons, that's not a great story. When you do start pulling in NuGet packages too, one of the big challenges is you have to make sure you load them in the right order if there's a big dependency chain. I don't know if you've ever encountered that before, and I haven't honestly done that in quite a long time, probably over a year ago. But figuring out what order to load them in to make sure that they load properly can kind of be a pain.
Totally. Yeah, and I know Joel's got some pretty strong feelings about this, and we've referenced that issue a couple times. The native dependency management gets even crazier as you go to cross-platform and that sort of thing. So I don't know. We might look at like doing RIDs like .NET Core does, or maybe trying to leverage their RIDs somehow to do this easily. But it's definitely tricky. But we got to start tackling it as we drive towards RTM. And by the way, the one thing I might have left out of that roadmap thing is we are targeting, as I've said here, we are targeting the end of the calendar year to ship an RTM or whatever you call it. So these problems do need to start getting solved sooner rather than later.
By the way, somebody else asked me about just module dependencies, because they had something they wanted to make dependent on a module which only exists on Windows, but they wanted the rest of their stuff to work, everywhere. And I'm like, you're stuck, because if you take a required module and publish it to the gallery, then nobody can install that module on Linux because the other module won't load, right? So if you put it in required modules and you do install module, then when you're on Windows, it'll work fine. But if you're on Linux, your module won't load because your dependency won't load.
Yeah, I mean, I think my guidance there would be that the only benefit of using a required module is so that module gets installed.
But that's the whole point of having package management. Otherwise, I might as well make an installer.
That's true.
Right. So
without that, I don't have package management. It's
right. But my point is, you don't if the module that you're requiring is not in the package management system, so to speak, right? Which a lot of these Windows modules are not. Then there's really no value.
Right. No. So we have a way in the PowerShell gallery. We have a way of saying I require this module, but it's managed externally.
Right.
What we don't have a way of doing is saying install this module because I need it, but don't load it for me. I'll load it with conditional logic inside my module.
Right. And I would say that there's really no value in putting it there because the first one won't actually happen. Right? So if you
won't actually
have
happen?
the module on your box, like if you're not on Windows and you don't have the module, there's nowhere to go get it from, right?
No. So this was, you can see it in the comments. Keith said it was him. They were looking at a VS setup module.
Okay.
Which is that's not a built-in Windows module.
Oh, I see. You're just saying you required a module on Windows. So in other words, you need some sort of conditional logic to say, hey, this module is only required on Windows. But you still are going to get it from the guy. All right, I miss her.
It's the same. Like, it's ultimately the exact same conversation we've had about libraries, but now it's bumping up to module level.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's wow. Okay. So yeah, one other thing to just add on to the dependency management too is it would be cool to be able to declare or have PowerShell automatically install dependencies from a gallery just by declaring them as dependencies. Kind of similar to NuGet and like NPM and whatnot, where you just do like a NPM restore or a .NET restore. I don't really think that capability exists right now. You have to kind of explicitly do an install module.
But that works. I mean, that works if they install your thing from the gallery.
So are you asking, Darwin, for something where like I could point at a module that I got from outside the gallery and say, hey, if I don't have all the dependencies there, go look in the gallery form.
Yes, it's the developer scenario. So if I pull something from GitHub because I want to contribute,
Right.
in the node world, I do npm install, and it looks at the package JSON, and it downloads all the dependencies, including development time dependencies. Don't have that for PowerShell Gallery.
Yeah, this is Trevor. I was the one who was calling that out, actually. But yeah, it would just be nice to be able to like author a new module and then declare the dependencies in the manifest and have PowerShell automatically install them for me so that I don't have to, go out and separately run like an install module command, if that makes sense.
Right.
It's kind of a simple thing, but
Simple to say. It definitely sounds useful.
Yeah, that does sound useful.
Prompt.
because right now, if you write a new module and you declare a dependency, and the dependency isn't available, then it just fails.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. These things have definitely been thought about from the consumer standpoint for a long time, and I think you guys are all valid points here. Just going back through some of the chat here, do you have any bright spots, Steve, that you saw?
There's some. I need to scroll up.
Registry of installed PowerShell versions. Glenn, I will tackle this one in just a minute. I just want to look up the rest of these dev problems here. Writing native commandlets, examples on how to call native libraries. Okay, definitely examples on calling native libraries.
Yeah, I'll give you a practical example of that if you want. This is Trevor again. So I use a Mac, and I wanted to gather some hardware metrics from it, just like CPU, disk, memory type of information. On Windows, we have the nice WMI service that kind of standardizes the interface for performance metrics. But unfortunately, with Mac, there's a bunch of disparate commands that plug into native libraries. And I actually came across a Ruby gem called iStats that retrieves a bunch of useful information that a lot of other utilities don't provide. And they built a Ruby native library that actually plugs into like native Mac libraries. It'd be really cool to be able to do that same type of thing from PowerShell and provide, rich objects that expose that type of low-level information.
Yeah, so there's we haven't been looking quite as much at the sort of low-level system management or that sort of scenario on Mac and Linux yet. It's all been sort of about targeting the cloud and cloud orchestration from Mac and Linux clients. But there's two approaches we could take there on the systems management approach. One of those is to use OMI, which actually has a number of these providers already built cross-plat. I actually don't know if they support Mac.
No, I don't think they do.
They support 30 flavors of Unix, including all the BSDs and the Solarises and all that stuff. I'm genuinely not sure if
Pretty sure it doesn't support Mac.
No. Well, on the Linux side, then it sounds like that's an option. They have some providers for CPU storage that were all built for like system operations management way back when. Pull exactly those kinds of metrics and be schematized exactly the same as they're schematized, or translated the same as CDXML command. The other option is to start writing all those adapters, and I think long term we'd love to do some adapters for Python or Ruby or whatever that allow us to call into some of that coverage. I don't know exactly what this sort of pinvoke equivalent looks like on the Linux side today. I think that it exists, but I doubt that you want to go and rebuild that coverage from scratch. Maybe you do. We should have an example for those people that do, but
No, we do have a native library interface for Linux that's in the GitHub repo. You can just look at today if you just want to see some of that code, if that's what you're asking for.
Yeah, where's that at? What's it for?
I'll dig it up and I'll post it in the chat.
Nice, thanks.
Cool. Okay. Sorry, continue going up here. So I want to go to Glenn's real quick, just before it gets lost here. He had a question around, hey, like how can we find PowerShell on the machine? So there's an RFC out right now that I need to update around like an installer for PowerShell Core. We want there to be a set of commandlets to make it easier to install, especially on Windows. I think those commandlets long term will also fulfill a similar role to like venv or rbenv for Python and Ruby, where you need some way to keep track of all of the different versions that you have installed side by side and be able to drop into them for different applications and so on and so forth. So we know we need to do that. I don't think that that's a big deal before we've shipped a second minor version. So right now, and in fact, Steve just submitted a pull request where we're switching the MSI over to do an upgrade install, which will let servicing be a lot easier for 6.0. So if we come out with a 6.0.1, that would be an MSI that is, would be an upgrade install in place, as opposed to, 6.1 would probably be a side-by-side install. Or we can figure it out. Maybe there's some way in an MSI to give an option or something like that. But the zip install will always be available, always be side by side, and would probably not be part of that registry or well-known set of installed PowerShells, because we probably do need some sort of registration to happen from the MSI side in order to be in the well-known set of PowerShell 6. Buzz is happening down here at the bottom. Oh,
but let me just add on to what Joey was saying. So I think that PR was merged. So for beta 5, which should come out in a couple of weeks, you'll get the upgrade rather than having to uninstall the previous beta. Right. The other thing is, it'd be good to have some data on how many people actually have side-by-side installs of PowerShell Core before we decide how much we want to invest in this space. Certainly for developers, they'll probably have at least the newest one and the last stable one. For end users, it's not clear to me right now because we haven't shipped yet. Let alone having multiple versions. How often this will be a problem.
And so, Glenn, that will, I just need to update this RFC. I've been a little bogged down lately.
For the answer, Joel, our plan is not to break anything. Of course, some stuff happens out of our control.
So this is this guy.
Yeah. So let me just, before I conclude on that topic, so, when we move to semantic versioning, one of the things that we're trying to stick with is that unless we go to a 7.0, we don't have any planned breaks, unless they're for really good reasons with very minimal impact, in which case it will have a breaking change label. And for 6.0, we are taking more breaking changes now because we don't want to break it after 6.0. So there's intentional breaking changes and there's unintentional main bugs that introduce a breaking change. Hopefully we'll get the plan is to have sufficient test coverage by the time we ship so that we'll minimize any future regressions.
Okay, moving along. What else we got here? PowerShell have to be installed there? Is it just defaults? So having env variable aware.net targeting stuff might be best in an env and an IDE. Devin, can you explain this one more? This env variable aware.net targeting. Not sure what you mean by that.
Skip it.
All right. So when you guys talk about just using NuGet, I assume you're talking about, do you believe, and I don't know what you mean here by actually supporting Net Standard 2 for NuGet packages, but are you guys proposing that we use NuGet for PowerShell modules in addition to
No,
C.
for that question, I just mean currently all the packages publishing with the market feed are targeting Net Core app and are not therefore usable as .NET standard libraries, which basically means if I want to build anything that works in Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core both, I can't target .NET Standard 2, so instead I have to target .NET Core App and .NET 4.6.2.
Well, and this is why we want to publish PowerShell standard versions of these, right? Because we can't get off of the Core App 2.0 from a runtime perspective, but we can build assemblies that aren't actually the runtime assemblies, which will use, switch at runtime to the SMA on the box for full CLR or the core CLR one if you've got it available. So it's the ones in the MyGet right now.
I have two questions about that.
Runtime assemblies.
If you have time, I have two questions about that. And the first is, how does it find the real ones?
Yep.
For core? And the second is, when is that something that you're actually working on for near-term releases, or is it just something you want to get done by the end of the year?
No, that's like when I talk about our dev story, that's what I'm talking about. So I would like to see that come out within the next couple of milestones. If not, it's right now, it looks like there's been no traction there. There's not been a push because the PowerShell standard stuff doesn't right now, but somebody should be tackling it soon and getting it building again. It's just a behemoth that people have been not wanting to touch for a little while, and I think that it's time to buck.
And I think, Joe, you had a scenario that was perhaps a little different, right? This is not just building a PowerShell module that's cross-platform, but I think you were looking at having a host. Exactly. Yeah. Cross-platform host.
But it doesn't actually matter if you write a module that needs to reference the library, it's the exact same story.
Yeah.
And so, and when you asked too about where do you find it, I believe your the .NET guidance is essentially to redistribute .NET Core with your application. If you need to host PowerShell itself in your application, and you can't depend on the Net Framework 1 being available, on a Windows or via the GAC or whatever, then you need to bring .NET Core with you, and that's where you're picking it up from.
And in our case, .NET Core and PowerShell.
And PowerShell, yes. Thank you.
So every package, every app is going to redistribute the whole thing.
I believe that is their current goal. They have something called the shared framework, but essentially you're tying yourself to in many ways .NET Core reserves the right to shift around, so to speak.
Well, it's just they have when they have a .NET right now I'm packaging using .NET Publish, right? And it has a switch that says standalone. If I don't set that switch, it's still a gigantic pile of DLLs because it's every little dependency that's not part of the core. But if I say standalone, that gigantic, self-contained, right? If I say self-contained, it becomes an even bigger pile of...
Right. No, and you would have to say, you would essentially have to tell your users to go install the shared framework, and that you'd have to be particular about which versions they were installing of that thing, and you'd have to...
Right, which I can do. I mean, as an example, on Windows, I would ship this using Chocolatey, right? So I would just have Chocolatey take the dependency on .NET Core and on, hopefully, a PowerShell package that was maybe on Chocolatey, but I wouldn't want to ship all of that in my package. I'd want to take a dependency on the packages.
Right.
The same thing on the Linux world. PowerShell is already in a package provider, so I would want to ship my thing with a dependency on those packages.
Right.
And so
Sounds right.
I just don't understand, I guess, on the Linux side of things, I don't understand how the reference assemblies find the actual PowerShell. Is it just based on a hard-coded path, or?
So, I mean, we don't have a shared framework story for PowerShell. So even if you were to use the .NET Core shared framework, you would have to redistribute PowerShell with your application.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's come up in some of these discussions, is how big of a, because this only applies to hosting. So if you want to host PowerShell, then you redistribute all this junk. And we're wondering how common is that likely to be?
Yeah, how many?
Yeah,
how many
I mean, what I'm building is a Jupyter kernel. So if you're
Okay.
familiar with Jupyter, it's the DevOps notebooks kind of concept.
Sergey actually, if you go poking through his GitHub, there might be some code you can pick up because he wrote a
Yeah,
prototype.
I already rewrote it because he was shelling to PowerShell.
It was
but so I have the kernel working, and it's on Chocolatey, but you can't find it because it's beta, as somebody already said about the PowerShell core. Yeah, it's just a really weird. So like right now, I didn't redistribute with self-contained. So right now it works if you run it on, say, a Linux box, but it comes up and says there's no commands available because I didn't ship all the command DLLs.
Right.
So it's like get child item not found. Sorry. Yeah. So that's fine. If I need to ship the whole thing, I need to ship the whole thing. That I can live with that.
Yeah, there's just so you guys know too, we're having a conversation. This is not going to happen in the 6.0 timeframe, but we are talking about how we might be able to expose PowerShell as like a REST endpoint, and have some way to treat a PowerShell instance as sort of a micro.
Just do a Jupyter kernel. That's what everybody else does.
Well, this is where I think that the driving impetus for this is PowerShell editor services and being able to host it in more than just.
Well, that inherently that Jupyter kernel works. It's what the Jupyter spec calls for is a 0MQ API rather than HTTPS server.
I will bring that up with David because he's a big 0MQ fan, and I'm not sure he's aware of that,
but it's really neat because they have the ability to do side channels, so you can actually implement all the PowerShell streams if you really wanted to in your UI.
Right.
Anyway,
this
is Darwin. I just had a side comment on your notes on the MSI plan.
Oh yeah, totally.
You're not going to be able to follow standard MSI protocols if you're going to have minor versions, change folder, install folders. You can do it, but it won't pass valid MSI validations, which at this point doesn't really matter. But don't try to follow standard minor upgrade MSIs and move files between folder structures or registry keys. All of that's no for minors. Has to be a major, and majors have to do it.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, it's got some very detailed rules because of the excessive amount of metadata inside of MSI around all the resources.
Right.
So you have to be careful about it's definitely not zips on steroids or anything like that.
Right. So you're not supposed to do side by side with minor versions.
Yeah, because theoretically all of your GUIDs for every file would remain the same, and then their folders are associated with the component. And so if you tell it, what you would generally end up happening is if you did this, you'd end up with, you'd end up with no files in the system because first, by default, it installs the new resources, then it rips off the old, but they'd all point to this, potentially. It's anyways, crossing the wires big time of an official way to do it. There's a way to hack it. Basically by making the target folder have the version number in it, but we could talk about that offline.
Yeah, that would, and I still want to have a call with you at some point, Darwin, because you do have all this MSI expertise, and we're gonna start going down that installer road pretty soon. So, I sorry I haven't reached out in a little while, but we should talk soon. Um, I do want to address a question I saw up further around DSC. Um, I assume this one was about the configuration keyword. Is that correct? Like declaring a DSC configuration? Um, Correct, yeah. So we actually do. We've supported the configuration keywords since our initial alpha release. You cannot use core to actually run DSC resources. So the LCM is not able to call into PowerShell core either on Windows or on Linux. But you can write your configurations and compile your MOFs on.
Compilation is gonna stop working because it's an unsupported API.
Oh,
Yeah.
Got it.
We're working to get that resolved.
so it works in a bunch of the versions that you can download that are old.
I
but-
don't think Travis has removed that yet.
Okay.
But just be aware that that's enough.
Be aware that we're using unsupported APIs and that may disappear. But today you can compile a MOF on Linux.
Yeah.
But you're not going to be using any PowerShell resources. This would be like with the native resources that call into OMI with the native LCM.
Yeah, I mean, you can compile things for Windows, for example, and put it on a poll server. So on Linux, you should be able to compile a configuration for Windows using the Windows resources, because all it needs from the resources is the MOF file, but you can't run it locally, obviously.
Right.
And you can't push it. You either manually copy it or use the poll server.
Okay, so will the LCM eventually support PS Core 6? They're investigating it heavily. I don't think that they have anything to talk about quite yet. There's a pretty strong desire for DSC to follow a lot of what we're doing on the PowerShell side, and I think they'll have more to share there.
So Darwin, what do you guys think about establishing an environment variable for the current PowerShell core version? I could roll that into the Chocolatey package. We could also use it in the OpenSSH package. And whether we at this point agree that it will indeed be superseded by something else, or we will indeed try to reuse it, at least for the time being and immediately, we could have that value of being able to find it across all these different things that people are trying to do with it.
Yeah, I think that probably just inherently, like, that sounds like it makes sense to me. I'd like to look at what patterns are being followed by other runtimes across the ecosystem. Bruce, do you have something there?
I'm not sure how it's going to work on like non-Windows platforms. Who's going to set the registry variable?
No, it's an environment variable. So that actually is a benefit of it. Is it, it's not in the registry.
Yeah, no, that was a mistake on my part. Who's going to set the environment variable on the non-Windows platform?
It wouldn't matter so much as if we just had a standard name for the time being. You could set it yourself if you're using, like even on Windows, if you're using the zip, you have to set it yourself. But on the technologies that do support it, or other technologies that want to tap into it for the agreed value, having an agreed name would have a lot of value in the meantime. And then if there's a bit broader strategic approach that completely replaces it, great. But I mean, for the next year or however long, we could have something we could all go to.
Hopefully we'll have this resolved before we ship 6.0. And setting the environment variable implies that you know where it is. So I don't know if it gives us much in the short term.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would have to be done at install time, whether that's someone manually setting it up, creating their own script or whatever.
Are package managers on Linux not able to export environment variables?
I have to look at how they do it, if they do it.
The issue that I've seen as we've been looking into environment variables is that environment variable management has like changed on a couple distros in the last few releases, and there's this move to like Etsy environment, which is used universally instead of just building these environment variables in various nested profiles. And so environment variables are just really complicated. But I think we can look into it. I would want to see what's going on at install time for these other package managers and what the pattern is for Python root and so forth. But I think it's raised.
Isn't it kind of redundant? I mean, isn't the answer just make that folder be in your path? Rather than adding a new environment variable, just put PowerShell path in your path?
Paths are horrible. And you get in, I mean, you get into
But that's how every script language, every scripting, everything does it that way, right? Python installs, you don't have to know where to find Python, you type which Python.
Yeah, but I think there's like a Python, it probably puts in a set. I mean, I think there's like a Python version, I think there's like a Python library path or something like that. Like there's all, like, they go squat over a bunch of stuff.
Well, they put a shim in, like mvbin or whatever it is, so that when you do which Python, it doesn't actually point at the real install location for Python, right? It points at a Python.
Yeah, but even that
symlink or whatever.
Instead of tooling, it's not just
Yeah, and also in we don't have an equivalent to which in Windows outside of PowerShell. We have get command inside of PowerShell, but outside we don't.
Yeah, that's also true. I just saw this one up here from Bobby. This is a great conversation. I think we got it, but I just wanted to say here, right now, yes, you should ship PowerShell as its own process. I think in the future we want to move towards a place where you can communicate with PowerShell via editor services, and that there's an endpoint exposed.
Or JSON RPC, more specifically.
Yeah, the other positive for environment variable is overriding at the process level and not having to parse a path to override it at a process level.
Yeah, I mean, just philosophically, just based off the last couple months, and I mean, we in a couple design ways, I think we stalled on some progress, and that we've been. But I think we're just trying to not solve the entire universe of problems, and there's an immediate need for some of these sorts of things. Like you said, I'm okay breaking environment variables between 6.0 and 6.1. I might not be as okay breaking the PowerShell language between those two things. But I do think that we need to just try some of this stuff and see what happens in our world for the next 5 to 10 years. Design these. So.
Yeah, and I also think too that so far there was some developing ideas about registry emulation on .NET Core, which would be interesting if it was just text files. That's probably, I have a feeling that's not really going to get any gravity. And there's been no ini files in Windows since Win95, so we come down to the last resort that is shared and still available as environment variables.
Yeah, we're also using obviously there's sort of a chicken egg problem, but we moved a bunch of the registry values that we needed in Windows PowerShell into a JSON file in PS Home. And we were trying to redesign that into this glorious startup config thing, and we decided that the JSON config is doing the job just fine, so we're going to stick with that for the time. Registry emulation in a JSON file, but yeah, I mean, for your purposes, I understand why that doesn't really solve your problem. But anyway, we're coming up on time here. Do we have any final questions? Not finding a doc and creating cross-platform binary. Host PowerShell is hopelessly out of date, and that's what I want to update with 5 and 6. Like, change our assembly load context story a number of times. We know we need to go back and rev like all of our developer documentation, have a real SDK, have guidance around, how to port a module, how to make a greenfield cross-plat module, cross-CLR module, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that doc is just, it's the right doc, it's just out of date. Anyone have any final questions here, last minute or so? It's been a really healthy set of discussions, guys. I really appreciate you all joining us today. And yeah, we were burned even by .NET Core 1.0 RTM, I would say. And the tooling has changed a number of times, but I think this is, 2.0, Core 2.0 is reaching RTM very, very soon here. And this is, like, in my opinion, the true 1.0 and really the arrival of the North Star vision. Yeah, totally. And the fact that we depended on all their blogs and everything, and we did what we were supposed to do with Net Standard, and that all these Windows PowerShell modules have just worked is, I think, proof that they're realizing their true vision here.
All right, I gotta head out. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. I will get the last 2 talks now up on YouTube and post a link on Twitter into the PowerShell RFC community call. Yeah, we really appreciate it too, Darwin. I'll try to set up some time with you to talk MSIs. Glenn, Thomas, Nicholas, we really appreciate you guys all joining. Thank you, Jeremiah. You guys are all the best. We love having you, and I'll try to get Michael Green, maybe see if there's some swag we can get available for the next call. Get some random drops on who to send those to. I like that you like that, Joel. Thank you, Simon. See you guys later.